Imagine for a second that it is 1936. You walk into your living room, the wood floors are creaking a little bit underfoot, and you turn the heavy dial on your family's console radio.
Right, just settling in for the evening.
Exactly. And you are tuning in, basically expecting a standard run-of-the-mill jungle safari adventure. You figure you'll hear some generic lions roaring, maybe the crack of a hunting rifle.
The usual stuff.
Yeah, the usual. But instead, pushing through the warm hum of those vacuum tubes, you hear the dry, raspy, echoing laughter of a shriveled, severed human head.
Oh, wow, yeah. That is quite the opening.
It really is. And it isn't just laughing. It is chattering away in a dead language, literally giving turn-by-turn directions to the lost civilization of Atlantis. It's unsettling, it is completely bizarre, and it immediately just grabs you by the throat.
It totally shatters the listener's expectations of what a geopolitical adventure serial was supposed to be in that era. I mean, that feeling of unexpected, jarring wonder is exactly what we are exploring today.
So, pull up a chair. You're sitting in a warm, dimly lit room right now. Outside, the evening is quiet, but inside, the air is thick with anticipation. You are at the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas, Chesterton Radio.
The best place to be?
Right. The glow of the equipment is the only light, and we are embarking on an under-the-hood deep dive into the complete 26-part classic radio serial, Moon Over Africa: Search for Atlantis.
It's a massive undertaking, really.
It is. And rather than giving you some tedious chapter-by-chapter plot summary, we're going to tear this narrative apart to see how its engine works. We're looking at this surviving audio artifact from the 1930s as a complete, cohesive work, examining the underlying architecture of a story that kept audiences glued to their radios week after suspenseful week.
Which is a really crucial distinction to make. When you consume a serialized narrative like this in a modern binge listening format, the structural engineering of the story becomes incredibly apparent.
Oh, definitely. You see all the seams.
Exactly. The writers of this era were operating under extreme constraints. They had these 15-minute blocks, minus commercial time, of course, to establish a setting, introduce a conflict, and leave the characters in a situation so desperate that the listener had no choice but to tune in the following week.
And that relentless pacing is the very first thing that hits you when you listen to all 26 parts back to back. I mean, it is physically exhausting for the characters.
There is zero downtime.
Zero. If they escape a hostile tribe, they immediately fall into a volcanic crater. If they escape the crater, they are suddenly hunted by prehistoric ape men. The escalation of stakes is just exponential.
It really makes you wonder how a 1930s audience digested this, because waiting 7 days between cliffhangers, well, it allows your brain to reset a bit.
Right, you get a breather.
Exactly. But listening to it all at once, you realize the environment itself is designed to be an inescapable meat grinder.
A total meat grinder. And that relentless escalation places this serial squarely in the grand tradition of lost world fiction.
Oh, absolutely. If you trace the literary DNA here, you are looking at the direct descendants of H. Rider Haggard's King Solomon's Mines, or She, and Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World.
The classics.
Right. And these stories operate on a profoundly Chestertonian theme, the romance of discovery. They explore this beautiful, terrifying idea that while our cartographers might claim the map of the world is fully drawn and completely understood, the universe is always larger, older, and vastly more mysterious than strict scientific logic can account for.
I completely agree with that lineage. But before we get into the mechanics of this specific adventure, we kind of have to address the ghost story surrounding the actual production of this audio.
The disputed history.
Yeah, the origins of Moon Over Africa are incredibly murky, which honestly only adds to the mystique for me. Our sources indicate this originated in South Africa, which explains some of the highly specific linguistic choices and cultural touchstones used throughout the script.
Right, there's a distinct flavor to it.
But if you look at historical catalogs, you will very often see this serial attributed to the famous pulp writer Talbot Mundy.
That attribution is such a fascinating piece of radio mythology. I mean, Talbot Mundy was a titan of Eastern and African adventure fiction in the early 20th century, so it makes logical sense that archivists would assume he penned this.
Sure, it fits his style.
It does. However, as the source material points out, that claim is highly disputed and remains far from an established fact. The actual authorship might just be lost to time entirely. But what we do know is that whoever wrote this was tapping into the deep-seated cultural anxieties and fascinations of the 1930s.
So let's explore that cultural context a bit. because any modern listener diving into this serial is going to immediately crash into the colonial era portrayals of Africa.
Right, it's unavoidable.
It really is. We are dealing with tropes that were standard currency in 1930s British and American popular entertainment. We have the superstitious natives, the concept of the White Hawk savior descending into the dark continent, and just sweeping generalizations about indigenous cultures.
Very typical of the era.
Yeah. And we aren't here to endorse those viewpoints, but we have to impartially understand why they were the default setting for a 1930s radio producer.
To understand the why, we have to look at the geopolitical reality of the audience listening to this broadcast. In the 30s, the Western world was watching the twilight of massive global empires. The era of blank spaces on the map was rapidly closing.
Everything was being charted.
Exactly. So for a writer trying to evoke terror and wonder, the African interior was utilized as a narrative blank slate, a place where the rules of Western modernity could be entirely stripped away.
Like a shortcut.
Precisely. The tropes you mentioned were a shorthand, a way for producers to instantly signal to their listeners that the protagonists had crossed a threshold from the civilized, logical world into a realm where ancient, untamed forces ruled. It's an imaginative artifact of its time, basically a sociological mirror reflecting the imperial mindset, which we are analyzing purely to understand the mechanics of the storytelling.
That makes perfect sense. They use those tropes as a narrative shortcut. And that shortcut brings us to our central cast, a really fascinating quartet who immediately get pushed across that threshold.
The expedition team.
Right. We have Professor Anton Edwards, this massive, imposing figure who is both a physical explorer and a highly academic linguist. And he has dragged along his daughter, Lorna, who essentially just stepped off an American university campus and into a waking nightmare.
Poor Lorna.
Seriously.
Yeah.
They're flanked by Jack Martin, the professor's incredibly skeptical assistant. And finally, there is Unguru, a Maasai prince acting as their guide. And the inciting incident tying them all together is that shriveled, mummified severed head I mentioned earlier.
Yes. The severed head that speaks the lost language of Atlantis.
Which is just so weird.
It is. Now, Professor Edwards firmly believes this head is an ancient mystical relic. He believes he is on the verge of discovering the remnants of the Atlantean golden race. And he grounds this belief in his previous academic work, studying ancient rock formations and constructed languages with a former colleague named Lamberti.
Okay, let me challenge the entire premise of the professor's character right here. Because the script bends over backwards to tell us Anton Edwards is a man of rigid science. He's a respected academic.
Right, a man of logic.
Exactly. Yet he is risking his daughter's life and completely ignoring the terrified protests of his assistant Jack to follow the incoherent cackling of a dead piece of flesh. It defies all logic.
It does seem contradictory.
Jack totally thinks the professor has suffered a mental break, but Edwards just basically waves it away, saying something like, "This is Africa, the old rules don't apply." How does a man of science justify this? It feels like an enormous plot hole disguised as hubris.
It is definitely hubris, but it isn't necessarily a plot hole if we examine the psychology of the explorer archetype. Edwards represents a very specific kind of 19th and early 20th century academic, the obsessive.
Oh, right, the obsession takes over.
Exactly. His scientific logic hasn't vanished. It has been entirely hijacked by his desire for discovery. The prospect of proving his linguistic theories about Atlantis is so intoxicating that his brain just creates rationalizations for the supernatural.
He forces the pieces to fit.
He forces the impossible evidence to fit his preconceived hypothesis. But to truly understand why the head works so well to unnerve the rest of the party, we have to look at the auditory environment the radio producers built around it.
You mean the drums?
Because?
The Bush telegraph?
Yes.
Because from an audio engineering standpoint, the continuous sound of those drums is just a masterclass in building tension.
It really is. We have to consider the physical limitations of 1930s AM radio. You are dealing with static, frequency drift, and generally pretty low-fidelity speakers in the home.
Everything sounded kind of fuzzy.
Right. High-pitched or complex sound effects could easily turn to mush, but the low, rhythmic, booming frequency of a drum beat, that cuts right through the static. The producers utilize the limitations of their medium to turn those drums into a persistent, inescapable heartbeat underlying all the dialogue.
It functions as a form of auditory surveillance, basically.
Yeah.
The drums are a highly efficient telegraph system.
Yeah.
Before the characters have even packed up their camp for the day, the drums are already beating out the message, "White Hawks take wing, fly north, sun up."
It's chilling.
The entire continent knows exactly where they are and where they are going. It completely strips away any illusion of privacy.
And that lack of privacy breeds a very specific type of claustrophobia. You can be standing in the middle of a vast open savanna, miles from another human being, but the sound of those drums reminds you that you are surrounded.
You're never alone.
Never. It reminds the listener that the environment is active, it is watching, and it is communicating.
You see, that psychological warfare take a massive physical toll on the party, too, particularly on Lorna. Early in the journey, she actually begins sleepwalking.
Which is terrifying in the jungle.
Right. But it isn't just a physical ailment. She describes the sensation of being mentally dragged into the bush. It is as if the rhythmic pulsing of the drums and the oppressive heat have formed this physical weight that is just pulling at her brain.
The jungle as an active threat.
Exactly. The jungle isn't just a static backdrop with some dangerous animals in it. It acts as a hostile, predatory entity actively trying to consume their sanity.
This is a really sophisticated pulp horror technique. The unseen psychological threat is always more insidious than the physical one. But given the structural demands of a 15-minute serial, that psychological tension has to break and manifest into visceral danger to create the required cliffhangers.
And the invisible tension snaps in just a spectacular fashion. Lorna's sleepwalking finally leads her directly into the path of a massive 24-foot python.
A literal monster.
Yeah. To save her life, the professor fires his rifle and kills it. But in this environment, a snake isn't just a snake. This specific python is revered as a sacred deity by a local sect of snake worshippers.
A huge mistake on his part.
Instantly, the academic expedition transforms into a desperate flight for survival. They manage to outrun the snake cult, only to stumble blindly into the territory of a hostile cannibal tribe, where they are overwhelmed and thrown into a grass prison hut. And this scenario brings us to the most fascinating character dynamic in the entire serial, the role of Unguru.
Unguru is a complex figure to analyze. When we discuss those colonial tropes of the 1930s, the faithful native servant is a primary fixture.
It's everywhere in the genre.
Right. And on a purely superficial level, Unguru appears to fit that mold perfectly. The script has him speak in broken English, he refers to the professor with deferential titles, and his loyalty to the party seems absolute and completely unquestioned.
But if you strip away the 1930s dialogue and just look at the raw mechanics of the plot, Unguru is the undisputed alpha of this entire narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
He is arguably the most competent, lethal, and perceptive character in the story. When the great, brilliant professor of science is trapped in a grass hut by cannibals, his intellect is completely useless. It is Unguru who carries the entire team on his back.
That is the subversion of the trope right there. The writers created a scenario where Western modernity is rendered entirely impotent. Unguru, as a Messiah prince and a seasoned warrior, completely bypasses the cannibal guards.
He's like a phantom.
He really is. He sneaks weapons into the prison hut right under their noses, and then he systematically and silently dispatches the sentries by breaking their necks in the pitch blackness of the night.
And we really have to talk about his weapon, because it is practically a character in its own right. He carries this massive spear that he calls the Snake Woman.
Such a great detail.
It's amazing. He treats it with this reverent, terrifying personification. He tells the others that the Snake Woman is thirsty, that she wants to, quote, kiss her enemies. It is such a stark contrast to the professor's analytical worldview.
Completely different paradigms.
Yeah, the professor's relying on crumbling maps and theoretical linguistic models. Unguru is relying on deeply ingrained survival instincts and an intimate, almost spiritual connection to the violence of the environment.
It highlights a brilliant thematic dichotomy. The professor views the world as something to be studied and categorized. Unguru views the world as something to be survived. And in this specific arena, survival instincts outrank academic theory every single time.
Though, to be fair to the professor, he does try to contribute to the escape, but his contribution is almost comical in its reliance on pulp cliches.
Oh, the magic trick.
Yes. While they are waiting in the dark hut, he spins in a circle 3 times to spook the guards outside with what he calls white man's magic.
It's so ridiculous.
It is a classic pulp hero tactic leveraging local superstitions to buy a few hours of time. The guards are terrified that he is casting a hex. But ultimately, it is Unguru's brute efficiency that breaks them out.
It always comes down to Unguru.
Right. And when they run, the narrative structure of the serial undergoes a massive genre-bending pivot. They don't just run into another patch of jungle. They scale a mountain range, experience a localized earthquake, and literally slide down the interior wall of a massive, extinct volcanic crater,
They just drop right out of the genre.
plunging headfirst out of standard jungle adventure and into pure science fiction.
That descent is a brilliant piece of spatial storytelling. The slide into the crater physically and metaphorically isolates them. They are completely cut off from the known world,
Trapped.
trapped. The native porters they brought from the coast were left at the base camp. Their instruments, the very tools of their modern superiority, fail completely. The compass needle just spins wildly, rendered useless by the magnetic rocks of the crater walls. They are forced to adapt to entirely new physical laws.
And the environment inside this crater is mind-blowing. The sky isn't blue. It is bathed in a constant, soft green light emanating from gaseous vapors.
Very otherworldly.
It's super alien. The professor quickly deduces that the atmosphere is hyper-oxygenated. Every breath they take makes them feel incredibly energized, which explains how the flora and fauna have evolved. And let's talk about that evolution because it is straight out of a nightmare.
It's not just bigger animals.
No, we aren't dealing with lions and rhinos anymore. We are talking about massive prehistoric lizards and mutated chickens that weigh 100 pounds running wild.
100-pound chicken is quite an image. It is an environment where evolutionary biology has been placed in a vacuum and allowed to run totally rampant. But the genius of the writing here is that the flora is just as aggressive and lethal as the fauna.
Oh, the plants are terrifying. They encounter this tree that looks like an inverted weeping willow. The leaves are thick, fleshy, and shaped disturbingly like human hands.
How creepy.
And when the professor snaps a twig off one of the branches, the tree literally bleeds a thick red sap.
Just horrible.
Right. And while they are marveling at this botanical impossibility, one of those giant 100-pound mutant chickens wanders just a little too close to the trunk.
Oh no.
In a flash, the branches of the tree whip down and snare the massive bird, haul it up into the center of the canopy, and just devour it. It is an image straight out of a grim fairy tale, a carnivorous Rube Goldberg machine of nature.
And philosophically, this bizarre ecosystem really reinforces that core Chestertonian theme. It tells the listener, you thought you understood the rules of biology, you thought your encyclopedias were comprehensive, but the parameters of reality have just been entirely rewritten for you.
A total reality check.
Exactly. It forces a state of profound humility on the characters.
So, the rules of the game have completely changed. If hyperoxygenated air and carnivorous weeping willows weren't enough of a shock to the system, the very next thing they stumble upon in the center of this hidden African crater is something that breaks historical logic entirely.
Big reveal.
They encounter medieval English knights.
This is where the serial truly embraces the lost civilization trope, but it does so with a highly specific and deeply fascinating historical flavor.
Picture the scene. The party is making their way through the crater when they see a man wearing a tunic fleeing for his life from a pack of giant sacred apes.
Which is already a wild sentence.
Seriously. Unguru and the professor shoot the apes to save him. But the moment the gunfire stops, they find themselves surrounded by men in full medieval chainmail and armor, carrying broadswords.
Talk about a culture clash.
They are escorted to a massive, sprawling city that has been carved entirely out of solid volcanic rock. And the inhabitants are speaking a dialect of Middle English.
Which the professor can understand.
Right. The professor, putting his linguistic background to use, deduces that these people are the descendants of Crusader knights who, centuries ago, were shipwrecked off the coast of Africa, wandered inland, discovered this crater, and built an isolated society.
Let's unpack the historiography behind this narrative choice. Why Crusaders, right? In the 1930s, the myth of Prester John, the legendary Christian king ruling over a lost wealthy kingdom somewhere in the East or in Africa, was still a potent cultural memory and a staple of historical adventure fiction.
That myth was everywhere.
It really was. The writers are taking a 12th century European geopolitical anxiety, isolating it in a vacuum, and exploring how a culture mutates when it is cut off from the rest of humanity for hundreds of years.
And the mutation they discover is horrifying. This isn't some noble, chivalric society. The serial presents a culture where religion and political power have become completely intertwined and entirely corrupted.
Total theocracy.
Yeah. The rulers of the City of the Rock are a caste of cruel priests who keep the 70,000 citizens in line through absolute theatrical terror.
It is a sociological exploration of a quarantined faith. Without external moderating influences, their original belief system has warped into a pure mechanism of control. And honestly, nothing exemplifies that corruption more perfectly than their primary method of execution.
The execution device is a marvel of perverse engineering. It sits in the center of their massive temple. It is a gigantic mechanical crushing rock suspended right above an altar.
It is essentially a brutal, mechanized translation of divine wrath. The trap is controlled by an ancient Iron Crusader cross resting on the altar.
So dark.
When the high priest turns the cross, it triggers a spring-loaded mechanism that drops the massive stone slab, instantly crushing the victim. They've taken the ultimate symbol of their ancestors' salvation and physically reverse-engineered it into an instrument of mechanized slaughter.
The symbolism is incredibly dark. Because our heroes killed those sacred apes outside the city, the priests condemn the professor and Jack to death by this crushing rock. They are hauled into the temple in front of a massive crowd.
But they have an ace up their sleeve.
Yes, they do. The professor has a secret advantage. The queen of the city, who is sympathetic to the outsiders and basically hates the priests, managed to tip him off about how the mechanical trap actually works.
Insider information.
Exactly. So the high priest steps back, gives a grand speech, and reaches out to turn the iron cross. The professor simply raises his high-powered hunting rifle and fires a single bullet directly into the cross.
That single gunshot is a massive pivotal moment in the narrative. The high-velocity bullet shatters the iron cross, jamming the spring-loaded mechanism. The rock fails to drop.
A miracle to them.
To the 70,000 people watching who have absolutely no concept of modern firearms, it appears that the professor possesses a magic vastly superior to the divine power of the priests.
The psychological impact on the crowd is instantaneous. The failed execution sparks an immediate, violent civil war.
It just kicks off right there.
The professor goes from being a condemned captive to commanding a 30,000-man army loyal to the queen, pitted against the 40,000 troops loyal to the high priest. The serial suddenly turns into a tactical war drama, with the professor drawing up battle plans, organizing infantry squares, and deploying cavalry.
It's a huge genre shift again.
But right in the middle of this massive medieval battle, the serial delivers its biggest twist. The true villain is finally unmasked, and it isn't the high priest. It is a white man in European clothes, standing on a balcony, directing the enemy troops.
The mastermind.
It is Professor Lamberti, Anton Edwards' old academic rival.
This reveal is the structural fulcrum of the entire 26-part story. It is the exact moment the grand mystical illusion is shattered. Lamberti isn't just an opportunistic bad guy who happens to be in the crater. He is the architect of the entire expedition.
This blew my mind when I realized the implications. That talking severed head, the one chattering in the lost language of Atlantis that started this whole journey.
It was completely fake.
It was never ancient magic. It was a high-tech, miniaturized, air-powered radio receiver that Lamberti had meticulously planted inside a mummified skull.
Think about the technological leap of faith the writers were asking of their 1930s audience here. Vacuum tubes were bulky, batteries were heavy and inefficient.
Radios were furniture back then.
Exactly. The idea in a radio receiver small enough to fit inside a skull, operating on compressed air to create the vocal vibrations, was cutting edge, borderline science fiction for the era.
Super advanced.
Lamberti knew Edwards was obsessed with the constructed language they had developed together years ago. So Lamberti faked the entire supernatural phenomenon, broadcasting directions to the head remotely. His entire goal was to lure Professor Edwards deep into the most dangerous unexplored crater in Africa, hoping the environment would kill him so Lamberti could claim the glory of discovering the lost city.
It is an astonishing subversion. Let me ask you this, though. Does revealing the magic as a technological trick ruin the wonder of the story, or does it elevate it?
That's a great question.
Because I would argue it elevates it through pure irony.
Yeah.
You have Professor Edwards, the man who constantly preaches rigid scientific logic, who completely suspended his critical thinking and fell for what he thought was ancient magic.
He wanted to believe it.
Right. And on the other side, you have Lamberti, the villainous madman, who used cold, hard, cutting-edge science to fake the supernatural. It is a complete inversion of their expected roles.
It absolutely elevates the narrative, and it raises a really profound question about the nature of wonder itself. G.K. Chesterton often argued that uncovering the mechanical explanations of the universe doesn't diminish its wonder, rather. It reveals the staggering intricacy of its design.
I love that perspective.
In this instance, the magic is revealed as a machine, but it is a machine utilized for a deeply malevolent, complex psychological manipulation. Lamberti wasn't just building a radio, he was building a bespoke psychological trap tailored entirely to Edwards' ego.
And that psychological trap ends in a spectacularly violent physical confrontation in the heart of the city. Lamberti's forces are losing the battle. He is cornered in the palace. And because he is the ultimate pulp-mad scientist, he has a failsafe.
He's prepared for the worst.
He is wearing a heavy glass flask filled with a highly volatile contact explosive around his neck. He gloats that if they shoot him, the impact will detonate the flask and level the entire palace, killing everyone.
It is the ultimate logical stalemate. Guns are useless. Modern science has created a weapon that prevents the heroes from acting.
But modern science didn't account for Unguru.
Never count Unguru out.
While Lamberti is holding the room hostage, Unguru, who managed to recover his beloved snake woman's spear, steps out from the shadows. With unbelievable precision, he hurls the massive spear across the room. It strikes the flask squarely, but the force of the throw carries Lamberti and the explosive backward, tumbling down a stone tunnel before it detonates.
A perfect strike.
The explosion vaporizes Lamberti and seals the passage, leaving the heroes completely unharmed. The technological villain is defeated by the most ancient, primitive weapon imaginable. The Radiohead is crushed under the falling rubble of his own arrogance.
The mechanical mystery of the serial is definitively solved right there. The logical, scientifically quantifiable threat has been permanently eliminated.
Which leads to a brilliant narrative head fake. If you were listening to this in 1936, you might think, okay, the villain is dead, the mystery is solved, it's time for the heroes to pack up and head back to civilization.
Roll the credits.
Not a chance. Because the moment they leave the City of the Rock, the serial plunges them headfirst into genuine, inexplicable, terrifying dark magic.
They trade the manufactured supernatural for the very real thing. To escape the crater and bypass the remaining hostile forces, the Queen directs them to a secret route known as the Passage of the Rock, this massive, pitch-black cavern system that cuts directly through the mountain range.
The sensory details the audio producers emphasize during this exit sequence are incredible. Because it is completely dark, the characters have to describe what they're feeling and hearing.
It's perfect for radio.
When they turn on their flashlights, they realize the walls of this cavern are embedded with thousands of raw, uncut diamonds glittering like stars in the beam of the light.
Visually stunning.
They have to wade across an underground river, fighting off a massive crocodile in the dark, relying only on the sound of splashing water and the chaotic sweeps of the flashlight beam. And then, after surviving the river, they encounter a figure who changes the entire trajectory of the story. Sitting in the darkness is an eerie, blind old woman.
She is revealed to be the mother of the Queen, living entirely in the subterranean darkness. She agrees to guide them toward the surface, but as they walk, she continually repeats a chilling, cryptic warning, "Beware the eyes of the moon." The moon has cast longing eyes upon the young man.
She is talking about Jack. But wait, let's look at the mechanics of this scene for a second. How does she know?
That's the real mystery.
Unlike Lamberti's talking head, there is no air-powered radio receiver hiding in the cave walls. There is no trick of 1930s engineering here. She possesses a foresight that defies all logical explanation. She simply knows what is waiting for them.
It is the serial's way of telling the audience that just because one mystery had a scientific explanation, it does not mean the universe is entirely rational.
Right. Science doesn't explain everything.
So they climb a massive vine ladder up a vertical shaft and emerge back onto the surface of the mountain. And the moment they step out of the cave, they are bathed in the brilliant, harsh light of a full moon.
And instantly, the auditory environment shifts again. They hear the slow, rhythmic beating of ceremonial drums echoing through the valleys. They follow the sound, creeping through the thick brush, and look down upon the hidden village of the Leopard Men.
And this is where things get really dark.
And it is here that we are introduced to the true, final antagonist of the serial Afabi, the Witch of the Moon.
Afabi is, without question, the most compelling and dangerous figure in the entire narrative. The visual descriptions the characters provide are striking. She's described as having luminous golden skin and round, yellow, almost feline eyes.
Very unnerving.
The party hides in the tall grass on the perimeter of the village and watches a horrific ritual unfold. Afabi climbs into a wooden, coffin-like box. The village witch doctor, Malini, pushes the box directly into a roaring bonfire.
They think she's dead.
The wood burns away, but instead of a charred body, a massive, snarling leopard leaps out of the flames.
The execution of this scene is brilliant because of what the leopard does next. It doesn't run into the jungle. It slowly walks right up to the edge of the tall grass where our heroes are hiding. It looks at the massive professor, and looks at Lorna, and then it looks directly at Jack, and it begins to purr.
That purr is one of the most unsettling sound effects in the entire serial.
It is so intimate and so wrong. Jack is completely mesmerized. He is holding a rifle, but his hands are completely paralyzed. He can't break eye contact with the animal.
That moment establishes the sheer, terrifying scope of Ifabi's psychological power. If Lamberti represented corrupted physical science, explosives, radios, kinetic energy, Ifabi represents the dark, untethered arts of the human mind.
She is a master hypnotist.
Exactly. And immediately the conflict of the story shifts. The characters are no longer fighting massive armies of crusaders or giant lizards. They are engaged in a silent, devastating battle of wills.
And the serial demonstrates the horrifying reality of that psychological warfare during the voodoo sequence. It is agonizing to listen to.
It really gets under your skin.
One of the local warriors, a man named Adako, becomes intensely jealous of the strange hypnotic attention Ifabi is directing toward Jack. Adako wants Jack dead, so he goes to Malini, the witch doctor, to cast a death spell. And the writers do not gloss over the mechanics of this magic. They detail the ritual meticulously to ground the horror in physical reality.
The ritual is a masterclass in building psychosomatic dread. Malini gathers clay from a specific sacred riverbed. He mixes it with the blood of a freshly slaughtered chicken, and he sculpts a crude doll representing Jack.
So creepy.
Then Adako takes a long iron needle and slowly, deliberately begins piercing the clay doll, starting at the extremities and working his way millimeter by millimeter toward the heart.
Now contrast that with what is happening simultaneously back in the guest hut. Jack has absolutely no idea this ritual is taking place. He's just sitting there. Suddenly, he complains of a sharp twinge of rheumatism in his hand.
Just a small pain at first.
Right. But a few minutes later, a burning, agonizing pain shoots down his entire right side. His left foot goes completely numb. He is experiencing a creeping, total systemic paralysis. The professor examines him and finds tiny, inexplicable indentations forming on Jack's skin, corresponding exactly to where Attico is piercing the clay doll across the village.
It is a phenomenal exploration of psychosomatic terror. In the 1930s, the concepts of mesmerism, spiritualism, and the power of the subconscious mind to inflict physical damage on the body were massively popular topics in the cultural zeitgeist.
People are fascinated by it.
The writers are playing on the very real fear that the mind can be hijacked and turned against the body.
The terror lies in the professor's complete impotence. This giant of a man, armed with modern medicine and academic logic, realizes he's utterly powerless. He can't bandage a voodoo curse. He can't prescribe a pill to stop a magical needle.
Science fails him completely here.
Yeah, totally does. He is forced to swallow his pride and beg Ifabi to intervene. And her cure is just as visceral and just as psychologically taxing as the curse itself.
The cure is fascinating because it requires both a literal blood sacrifice and an immense psychological grounding. Ifabi demands human blood to break the connection. The professor takes a knife, slices his own arm, and lets his blood drip into a wooden bowl of warm water.
A real sacrifice.
But the physical act is only half the cure. Ifabi instructs the professor that he must force Jack to look directly into his eyes.
It is a literal transference of willpower. The professor has to project his own massive ego, his own relentless will to live, directly into Jack's fading consciousness. He is essentially holding Jack's heart beating by sheer force of personality, screaming at him to stay awake, battling the unseen magic with nothing but the strength of his own mind.
A battle of pure will.
He has to hold the line until Unguru, who has snuck across the village, violently breaches the witch doctor's hut, steals the clay doll, and dunks it into the bowl of the professor's blood, instantly shattering the spell.
When you look at the architecture of the serial, this is the ultimate battle. It isn't fought with hunting rifles, it isn't fought with crusader broadswords or contact explosives. It is fought entirely on the battlefield of mental fortitude.
Mind over matter.
The serial is making a profound statement in this unforgiving environment. Physical superiority and modern technology are secondary. The mind is the ultimate weapon and the ultimate vulnerability.
And Ifabi understands this better than anyone, which is exactly why, having saved Jack's life and essentially binding the party to her through debt, she immediately pivots to exploiting their mental vulnerabilities.
She knows exactly what they want.
She knows the white explorers are obsessed with discovery and wealth, so she tempts the professor. She hands him a heavy, solid gold goblet intricately carved with ancient Roman numerals. She casually mentions that there is an enormous cache of this Roman treasure hidden a few days' journey away.
The ultimate bait.
But, she adds with a smile, To reach it, they must pass through a place known as the Whispering Forest of Death.
The Whispering Forest of Death represents the absolute pinnacle of environmental hazard writing in early radio. It is a brilliant concept because it is an olfactory and auditory trap, relying entirely on sensory deprivation and overload, which plays perfectly to the strengths of an audio medium.
Let's paint the picture of this place for a second. The party enters the tree line, and immediately the air is thick with an overwhelming, intoxicating perfume.
It's heavy.
The canopy is incredibly dense, blocking out the sun, and the wind constantly whips through the strange leaves, creating a continuous, maddening, whispering sound. The noise echoes and bounces, making it completely impossible to track the direction of any sound. It disorients them instantly, and it is in this sensory nightmare that they encounter the Gorilla Man.
The Gorilla Man is described as a prehistoric ape-like hominid, but with a terrifying visual distinction. It has painted itself entirely in white phosphorus clay, making it look like a glowing ghost moving through the dark underbrush.
While the men are distracted, desperately trying to find a source of fresh water in this perfumed maze, the white Gorilla Man silently drops from the canopy and kidnaps Lorna and Ifabi.
It happens so fast.
The tracking sequence that follows is incredibly tense. The men have to follow broken twigs and disturbed leaves out of the forest, which leads them to a massive, stagnant lake. Dotted across the surface of the water are the stilt huts of the lake dwellers, a primitive society seemingly frozen in an evolutionary backwater.
And once again, the narrative requires a physical intervention that logic cannot provide.
Exactly. Unguru proves yet again why he is the apex predator of this story. He strips down and creeps across a precarious, rotting wooden bridge connecting the stilt huts over the dark water. There are 2 armed guards sitting by a fire on the platform where the women are held.
He doesn't even use a gun.
He doesn't need to. He sneaks up silently behind them, grabs them by the hair, and brutally cracks their skulls together. Then, with terrifying efficiency, he props their unconscious bodies back up against the railing so anyone looking from the distant shore will simply think they're still on duty.
Pure stealth.
It is cold, efficient, and ensures they can rescue the women and flee back into the forest undetected.
But the rescue is really only a temporary reprieve, because the Whispering Forest itself is still the primary antagonist. During their frantic escape, they stumble blindly into a massive grove of pulsating, bioluminescent orchids that constantly shift in color.
The orchids are mesmerizing. Lorna is immediately captivated by their beauty, but then the air grows incredibly heavy. The perfume in the grove becomes so thick it's almost a liquid. Jack and the professor suddenly realize their limbs feel like lead. The flowers are releasing what the locals call a breath of death, a highly concentrated, sleep-inducing toxic vapor. The plants are literally weaponizing beauty. The men have to physically drag each other, gasping and choking, out of the grove before they suffocate in the perfumed air.
Which brings them, finally exhausted and battered, to the object of their desire. Deep in the brush, they find 2 ancient stone markers, the weathered Roman headstones of a forgotten governor named Septimus.
They actually found it.
Digging beneath the stones, they unearth a massive iron chest packed to the brim with solid gold plates, coins, and swords. They have found the immense material wealth they were seeking, but the true cost of that discovery is the near-total destruction of the team from within.
Because Ifabi has been playing an incredibly patient, long game. She needed the physical labor of the white men to navigate the forest and dig up the heavy iron chest. But once the gold is exposed, she makes her final move.
She strikes when they're weakest.
The party is resting by the edge of a fast-moving river, exhausted, preparing to load the treasure into a dugout canoe. The professor and Unguru are busy with the boats. Jack is standing alone near the chest. Ifabi approaches him, locks her golden feline eyes onto his, and unleashes the full, devastating force of her hypnotic power.
And it's brutal.
She doesn't command him to attack the others. She commands him to draw his own revolver, place the barrel against his own temple, and pull the trigger.
It is a deeply shocking, intimate betrayal. After surviving mechanical crusader traps, hyper-oxygenated giant lizards, carnivorous bleeding trees, and prehistoric lake dwellers, the final, ultimate boss of this epic serial is simply a quiet, hypnotic gaze.
It's all in the mind.
Ifabi's weapon isn't a broadsword or an explosive. It is Jack's own mind turned inside out.
And Jack is utterly powerless to stop it. He slowly raises the heavy revolver to his own head. His finger tightens on the trigger. The professor turns around, sees what is happening, but he is too far away to reach him.
The suspense must have been killing the listeners.
The audio builds this excruciating tension. The listener is practically screaming at the radio. And how is Jack saved at the very last possible millisecond? Unguru.
Unguru saves the day again.
The man lost his legendary snake woman spear in the explosion with Lamberti, but he still carries a heavy, carved wooden war club. From the tree line, Unguru hurls the club with massive force. It strikes Ifabi's hand, just as Jack pulls the trigger, throwing her aim and breaking the hypnotic trance.
A literal last-second save.
In the sudden, violent chaos, Ifabi and her accomplice, Adako, stumble backward off the riverbank and fall directly into the swirling water, right into the waiting jaws of a massive shiver of crocodiles.
The narrative irony of her death is palpable. Ifabi, the Witch of the Moon, the woman who commanded the leopards and manipulated the complex minds of men, is ultimately undone by the most primitive, blunt force weapon imaginable, a thrown piece of wood.
It's almost poetic.
And she is consumed by the raw, untamed, mindless nature she arrogantly believed she could control.
It is an absolutely breathless, violent, and exhausting conclusion to a 26-part epic.
So, when we step back and look at the architecture of the journey as a whole, what are we left with? We see a serial that masterfully blended Professor Edwards' academic linguistic theories with relentless pulp action, Lamberti's cutting-edge sci-fi technology, and the ancient, terrifying mysticism of the leopard cult into one cohesive narrative.
It's a crazy mix.
It stands as a testament to the serialized format's ability to constantly reinvent its own threats, shifting from physical to technological to psychological, just to keep the audience desperately engaged.
It perfectly encapsulates the joy of pure, unadulterated exploration. It captures the sheer thrill of not knowing what impossible thing is waiting around the next corner or, in the bottom of the next extinct volcano.
But crucially, it also leaves us with a profound, lingering question. We solved the mechanical mystery of the talking head. We established that Lamberti faked it with a miniaturized radio. But if the talking head was nothing more than a trick of 1930s engineering, how did the blind woman in the underground diamond cave perfectly predict Ifabi's hypnotic obsession with Jack?
Right. She warned them, beware the eyes of the moon. The moon has cast longing eyes upon the young man days before they ever even met Ifabi, the Witch of the Moon.
Lamberti couldn't have programmed that prophecy into his radio transmitter. He didn't even know the blind woman existed. The serial meticulously solves its mechanical mysteries, but it deliberately leaves the true, terrifying magic of the continent completely intact and entirely unanswered.
It proves the professor right in the most unsettling way possible. The shadows hold genuine power.
It leaves the door wide open to the unknown.
And that is exactly why we continue to dissect and celebrate these classic audio artifacts, because they fundamentally understood that the shadows are just as important as the light in creating a sense of wonder. Well, the fire is burning low here at the little station on Commercial Street. We hope you have enjoyed pulling up a chair and taking this under the hood, deep dive into the lost world of Moon over Africa, reminding you that while maps may eventually end, wonder never does.
We highly invite you to seek out and enjoy the complete original serial for yourself, to truly experience the full, breathless pacing and atmospheric dread we discussed today.
Chesterton Radio is listener-supported, helping preserve classic radio, forgotten stories, Chesterton's writings, Morning Prayer, Under the Hood, and The Open Door, broadcasting classic radio around the clock.